The house should have greeted me with noise. After 3 weeks away on business, I expected the familiar chaos, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of the television, my wife's footsteps moving from room to room. Even silence would have been acceptable if it felt peaceful. But this silence was wrong. It sat heavy in the air, thick and uncomfortable, like a held breath that refused to be released. I dropped my suitcase near the door and called out her name. No answer. I checked the living room, empty. The kitchen, clean, too clean, no dishes in the sink, no half-finished coffee mug like she always left behind. A strange unease crawled up my spine. I tried calling her phone, straight to voicemail. That was when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. At first, I thought it was the house settling, pipes shifting, metal creaking. But then it came again, a broken, trembling sound, a sob, weak, muffled. It was coming from the garage. My heart began to pound as I crossed the hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. The door to the garage was closed, something we never did during the day. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then twisted it open. The smell hit me first. Stale air, sweat. Something sour and wrong. The light flickered as I switched it on, and then I saw her. She was lying on the cold concrete floor, her body curled unnaturally, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her hair was tangled and matted, her lips cracked and dry. Purple and yellow bruises bloomed across her arms and legs like rotting flowers. Her clothes were filthy, clinging to her thin frame. My wife, for a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. This was some cruel mistake, a nightmare I hadn't woken up from yet. God, no. I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of my voice. They were dull, unfocused, but when they finally locked onto me, they filled with tears. You came back, she croaked. That was all it took. I gathered her into my arms, feeling how light she was, how fragile. She winced as I lifted her, her body trembling uncontrollably. I kept apologizing over and over, though I didn't know what I was apologizing for yet. How long, I asked, my voice breaking. How long were you here? She swallowed with difficulty. 3 days, 3 days. Locked in a dark garage with no food, barely any water. No way to scream loud enough for anyone to hear. Rage surged through me so violently it made me dizzy. I looked around, noticing details I hadn't before. The empty water bottle near the wall, the faint scratches on the inside of the garage door, the lock fastened from the outside. This wasn't an accident. This was done on purpose. I carried her inside and laid her gently on the couch, wrapping her in a blanket. I wanted to call an ambulance immediately, the police, anyone, but she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. No, she whispered, please just stay. I stayed, as she sipped water slowly, painfully, her breathing steadied. Tears streamed silently down her face, soaking into the blanket. I brushed her hair back, my hands shaking, my heart splitting apart with every breath she took. What happened? I asked softly. Who did this to you? Her body stiffened. She turned her face away from me, her jaw trembling as if the words themselves were too heavy to hold. For a long time she said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second pounding into my skull. Finally she spoke. Our son did it, she said. The world tilted. What? I whispered. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears spilling freely now. He locked the door, took the key. He said I needed to learn my place. My chest burned as if something inside me had been torn open. Denial rushed in, desperate and foolish. No, he wouldn't. He's our son. She shook her head weakly and looked at me again. The fear in her eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen. He wanted to. Her voice cracked. She tried again. He wanted to. She broke down completely, sobbing into my chest, unable to finish the sentence. I held her as she cried, my mind racing, memories replaying themselves with horrifying clarity. The cold looks, the sharp words, the tension I had dismissed as teenage anger. How blind I had been, how careless. The danger hadn't come from outside our home. It had been growing inside it. And as I held my broken wife in my arms, one truth became painfully clear. Whatever my son had become, I would make sure he paid for it. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and quiet despair. Machines hummed softly beside the bed where my wife lay, her arm wrapped in bandages, dark bruises still visible beneath pale skin. Doctors said she was dehydrated, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. That word echoed in my head like a miracle I didn't deserve. Alive, I sat beside her for hours, watching the rise and fall of her chest, afraid that if I looked away, she might disappear. Every so often, she flinched in her sleep, her lips moving as if she were begging someone to stop. I knew who she was begging. Our son stood at the foot of the bed earlier that day. He wore concern like a mask, eyes wide, voice soft, hands shoved into his pockets, as if he were just another worried child. He asked what happened. He said he was scared. He said he'd missed me while I was gone. I looked at him and saw a stranger. Mom must have fallen, he suggested quietly. She's always been clumsy. I felt something twist violently in my chest, but I said nothing. I watched him closely, how his gaze never lingered on her injuries, how his shoulders never tensed with guilt or fear. How calm he was, too calm. When he left the room, my wife's hand tightened around mine. "Don't let him come back," she whispered. That night, when the nurses dimmed the lights and the world slowed down, she finally told me everything. It hadn't started with the garage, it had started with words. He had grown distant over the past year, cold, sharp, cruel in small, dismissible ways. He criticized her cooking, mocked her habits, corrected her tone. When she tried to talk to him, he accused her of controlling him, of ruining his life. "I thought it was just a phase," she said weakly. "I thought he needed space." The night before I returned, he exploded. She had asked him to clean the garage, a simple request. He laughed at her, called her useless, said she wouldn't dare make him do anything. When she turned away, he shoved her inside and slammed the door. At first, she thought it was a joke. Then the lock clicked. He said if I wanted to come out. She whispered, tears sliding down her temples. I'd have to apologize, to beg. She never did. For 3 days, he visited the garage only to remind her who was in control. He ignored her cries, ignored her pounding on the door. He watched through the small window, silent, expressionless. I realized, she said, her voice barely audible, that he wasn't angry. He was curious. That sentence haunted me. Curious, I went home alone that night. The house felt different now, tainted. Every hallway carried echoes I couldn't escape. I stood in the garage, staring at the lock, the scratches, the dried blood on the concrete where her skin had broken. I remembered him as a child, his first steps, his laughter, the way he used to cling to her leg when he was scared of thunderstorms. Where had that boy gone, or worse, had he never existed at all? I began to pay attention. I noticed how he smiled when people were uncomfortable, how he blamed others effortlessly, how he never apologized, only justified. Teachers called him brilliant but difficult. Friends came and went quickly. No one ever stayed. I checked his computer. Search history wiped clean, but not perfectly. I found forums. Threads about power, domination, punishment. Conversations where empathy was mocked and weakness despised. This wasn't something that happened overnight. This was something that had been growing quietly, patiently, right under our roof. The police would ask questions. They would demand proof. They would ask why a mother waited 3 days to escape, why a son would do such a thing, why a father didn't see it coming. And maybe they would never understand, but I did. I had raised him to believe intelligence was everything. Strength was survival. Winning mattered more than kindness. Somewhere along the way, love had become optional. That night I stood outside his bedroom door, listening to him sleep peacefully, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would not confront him. I would not forgive him, and I would not protect him, because monsters don't learn from words, they learn from consequences. And I was done pretending my son wasn't one of them. Revenge is rarely loud. It doesn't always arrive with shouting or fists or blood. Sometimes it comes quietly, methodical, patient, invisible to everyone except the one it's meant for. I became very quiet. To my son, nothing changed at first. I spoke to him the same way, asked about school, commented on the weather, ate dinner at the same table. I watched him closely, studying the rhythm of his confidence, the ease with which he moved through the world believing he was untouchable. That belief was my opening. I began with observation. I learned his routines, his habits, the places where he felt powerful. I listened more than I spoke, and what I learned confirmed what my wife had told me. He didn't just hurt people. He used them. At school, he manipulated classmates into doing his work, then mocked them behind their backs. Online, he provoked strangers until they broke, then laughed about it in private chats. Authority figures unsettled him, not because he feared them, but because he believed he was smarter. So I used that. I started small, anonymous tips to the school administration. Nothing false, only truths carefully timed. Screenshots sent from untraceable accounts, patterns highlighted, questions raised. Teachers began watching him. Opportunities disappeared quietly, recommendations stalled, group projects reassigned, he noticed, but couldn't understand why. Then I turned to his social world. I didn't accuse him. I didn't expose him directly. I simply let people see him clearly. I repeated his own words back to others, framed as concern. I asked questions that planted doubt. I stepped back and let his arrogance do the rest. Friends stopped answering his messages. Invitations dried up. Laughter behind his back replaced admiration. At home, I changed the rules, not harshly, not obviously, just enough. Doors were no longer locked for anyone. Privacy was earned, not assumed. Internet access flickered unpredictably. Plans were questioned. Stories were double-checked. He began to feel watched good. The first crack appeared one night at dinner. "Why is everyone acting weird?" he snapped, his fork clattering against the plate. "Did you say something about me?" I met his eyes calmly. Why would I need to? For the first time I saw it, uncertainty. Not guilt, fear. The nights got worse for him. He slept less, grew irritable, jumped at small noises. I'd find him standing in the hallway at odd hours, staring at the garage door like it might open on its own. I never mentioned what he did. I didn't have to. The walls were closing in, just like they had for his mother. Only this time there was no locked door, just the slow suffocation of consequences. One evening he finally broke. "She's lying, isn't she?" he said suddenly, his voice sharp but unsteady. "She always exaggerates. You believe me, right?" I put down the paper I was reading and looked at him. "No," I said simply. That single word shattered something in him. He raged after that, slamming doors, yelling about betrayal, injustice, how everyone was against him. He demanded explanations. He demanded loyalty. I gave him none, because loyalty is not owed to cruelty. Because love does not excuse monsters. Because power, once abused, must be taken away. And as his world unraveled, his confidence eroded, his mask slipped, his control vanished, I felt no joy, only resolve. This wasn't punishment. This was balance. And it wasn't over yet. The confrontation didn't happen the way stories usually tell it. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confession, no raised hands or broken furniture. It happened on an ordinary night. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house was dim, quiet, almost gentle, just like the night he had locked his mother away and gone to sleep without remorse. I asked him to sit with me in the living room. He hesitated. That alone told me everything. My wife was resting upstairs. She didn't need to be there for this. She had already survived enough. He sat across from me, arms crossed, jaw tight. The boy who once believed he ruled this house now looked like someone waiting for a verdict. "I know," I said. He laughed, a sharp, defensive sound. "Know what?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Everything." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. For a moment he said nothing. Then he scoffed. "You don't have proof." "You're right," I replied calmly. "I don't need it." That's when the mask finally cracked. His face twisted not with regret, not with shame, but with anger. "She deserved it," he spat. "She was always in my way, always judging, always acting like she owned me." I closed my eyes briefly. And there it was, no denial, no confusion, just certainty. "She begged," I said quietly. "Did you enjoy that part?" His silence answered me. I stood and walked toward the garage door. He followed slowly, warily. I turned on the light and opened it wide. The concrete floor was clean now, the marks scrubbed away. But some stains don't disappear, no matter how hard you try. I pointed to the door. "Go in." "What?" His voice trembled. "Go in." I repeated, "Sit." Fear flashed across his face. "You can't. I won't lock you in," I said. "This isn't about revenge the way you understand it." He stepped inside, shaking. I closed the door, but didn't lock it. Then I spoke. "You'll remember this room for the rest of your life," I said through the door. "Not because you're trapped, but because you could leave and she couldn't." Minutes passed. He said nothing. When I opened the door again, he was crying, not softly, not quietly, but with the raw panic of someone who finally understood what powerlessness felt like. "I didn't think it would go that far," he whispered. "I just wanted control." I looked at him for a long time. "Then learn this," I said. "You have none now." The police came the next morning. I gave them everything: timelines, medical records, messages, the lock, the scratches. I didn't protect him. I didn't soften the truth. I didn't explain him away. He screamed when they took him. I didn't look back. Months passed. My wife healed slowly. Some nights she still woke up shaking. Some days she stood in the garage doorway, breathing deeply, reminding herself she was free. I stayed beside her through all of it. As for our son, he lost his name to case numbers and files and cold concrete rooms of his own. No one hurt him there. No one had to, because the last lock wasn't on a door. It was on his future. And I held the key long enough to make sure he'd never use it against anyone again. Asterisk, asterisk, the house is quiet now. But this time, the silence feels safe. Asterisk, asterisk.